Well, thank you for coming out, Mr. Rosenflu. And so you're pretty much New York City original.
Yep.
You started out your career in a business and as an entrepreneur, working at a drugstore with your father.
Right.
Is that correct? And then you would later on go to open up your own store. And then after your success there, you ended up opening one of the first, or buying one of the first health food supermarkets. And actually it was called Whole Foods. Is that right?
Right.
So before Whole Foods was even a thing. So what was it like in New York City growing up, and what led to your career?
Well, it was very different growing up. I grew up in the Bronx, a stone's throw from Yankee Stadium, as I used to say. And I lived there for 20-odd years of my life, and it was certainly different than anything that we have today. The trolleys would be running. That's the way we would get around. There were subway systems, but the trolleys were on street level. They were a nickel, and a young person, a 10 or 11-year-old, could get on that trolley and go anywhere safely, not worried. The parents wouldn't worry. We would play on the street, in the schoolyard, and we'd stay out until supper time, and there would be no concern as to whether we were all right or not. You know, it was just a bunch of boys playing around.
Playing stickball and all the stuff you kind of see in movies.
They had stoop ball. We had a little stoop, or that's a building with steps, and we would bang the ball against the stoop, and everything was like having to do with baseball, because baseball was such a big deal when you were a kid.
You seem to come up in New York City. You've seen a lot of different eras, but you were there for like peak New York City, where you got your post World War II boom of everything, and you got your Sinatra, you got all the iconic New York City symbolism that you were there to witness.
We had a lot of the really great stuff. You're right. We had the Sinatras, and we had the New York Yankees and the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants all having a competitive baseball season, which was a lot of fun. Then you could, get a ticket for 65 cents to the Yankee Stadium, and it would be a grandstand seat. I think the bleachers were 50 cents. We would sometimes cut school and go downtown, go to the Paramount, or there were movie theaters there that all had shows. It wasn't like you went just to the movies. There would always be a swing band or Frank Sinatra. Plus, if it was Sinatra, there would be the Bobby Soxers lining up, screaming to get in, and the guys didn't bother with him. But we had the Gene Coopers and the Glenn Millers, and that's the music that I grew up with, and it's the music that I still love, the swing music and
the jazz and all the jazz greats and everything. So yeah. You were a patron to a lot of those kinds of shows and the clubs and stuff?
Later on, when I was a bit older, you go down to the Village Vanguard, which was a fun place to go to. They had a lot of music groups. They had the David Brubecks and Ella Fitzgeralds, and they would also have guys like Woody Allen performing at clubs in the Village, as well as Lenny Bruce. And that was a very special...
the kind of birth of comedy.
There was comedy, and Lenny Bruce was way ahead of his time, and people, a lot of it, they just didn't... Many people didn't get it. They didn't get the humor of it. And I went to see him once with a friend of mine who was Swedish, and she didn't get the gist of it, the subtleties of it, the interesting, commentary on our times. So it was a lot of the good times, and it was some of the bad times also. Some of the times that weren't so great, when things got out of hand in New York. The homeless people were a problem then, but it was also mostly drugs that were the big problem.
And that was come in the 70s and the 80s, or when did that?
70s and 80s. It started in the 70s and 80s with the heroin. Some people I knew died of heroin addiction. It's like a big thing in the poor neighborhoods, and people didn't have the jobs that they needed to get the money, so there would be car break-ins, and then the streets weren't as safe as they might have been or they were. But we got through it, and Giuliani actually, when he was mayor, really he did a good job of cleaning up some of the problems we had with the fellas who would go by and clean your windshield, and they would kind of be intimidating when you'd stop at a red light. Two guys would come out and clean your windshield, expecting you to give them some money. So that was the wider picture of what happened. I really started out as a young man working in my father's drugstore, which happened to be in Harlem. So I had a long exposure growing up in somewhat not living in Harlem, but working with my dad in his drugstore, and then opening up my own drugstore on 125th Street. So those were exciting times for me, and they were exciting times for Harlem and for the city.
Wow. So you kind of cut your teeth on the time you did working with your dad at the pharmacy there?
It was, I was growing up, learning how to be a businessman, learning what the ins and outs were, trying to get your customers, keep customers. And one of my jobs was to arrange the Christmas cards at Christmas time. So I'd be making sure we didn't run out of those categories, like make sure we had the mom cards and the daughters and the sister cards. So that was a big deal. I felt I was doing an important bit of work, and then interesting things would happen, like often people would come in and they'd ask me to read the Christmas cards or the Mother's Day card because they just weren't able to read. It was most often it was the men who would come in and say, "Would you read this card for me?" and pick out a mother card. And it was, rather sad and somewhat surprising for me because I grew up in an era where my friends, we all went to public schools, and we had some pretty good public schools and free high schools, and, everyone I knew got to read and write. And suddenly I was in a world where a lot of the people there did.
Is that because some of the older folks in that generation were coming off the heels of the Depression and stuff of that, so they maybe didn't quite get the education that people later on got, like you? Or what do you think, is that just the big city problems that you dealt with?
No, these were people from the South. A lot of them had been farmers. They've been sharecroppers. They've been picking cotton as kids. They start out very young down south. They didn't have any education at all. When they were very young, they would be out in the cotton fields picking cotton, making little bits of money that their families were able to scrape up. And then when World War II happened, things changed, because after that there was a big influx of black people from the South.
From the South. I never would have imagined that. I would have figured they're generationally New York City kind of people that came up in New York City, but a lot of them came from the South. I didn't realize that. Were those black folks in that community coming up from the South to, just like everybody else, looking for opportunity and jobs and stuff, or what do you?
They were there to work. They were there to make money. Some people ended up in Chicago and Detroit. That's when those cities up north started filling up with black people from the South who came up there because there were no decent jobs down south for them. There was no opportunities. And when they came north, they were able to get jobs. There were jobs of course, they weren't great jobs. I mean, there weren't, second-tier jobs. They really were the janitors of the city in a way. And they weren't even streetcar conductors. They weren't even at that level. They were pushing carts around in the garment industry.
Mhm.
And they were doing whatever they could to make some money and send it down south. And they were living in, rooming houses that had one room. I mean, that was it. They didn't have kitchens. They didn't have telephones. They just had maybe a room with a bed, and maybe they might have been sharing it.
Now today, notoriously, New York City is known to be very expensive, and even with your more white collar type jobs, people are having to live in a small, studio apartment type situation. Was it like that back then, or was New York City more accommodating to like middle class and working class people?
Back then, there was fine for the middle class because we were a very fortunate generation. My generation was, because right after the Second World War, things started booming in the in the States. We were the country that supplied the world with food and cars and every other thing.
Innovative products and...
Yeah, Europe was devastated. I mean, there was nothing going on in Europe.
Right.
We had some plan, the Marshall Plan. Truman had a plan to help people live, to help them, give them food, because the Second World was so devastating. I mean, it was just like, there was nothing left in Europe. And so it was an opportunity in the United States. We were building everything, supplying food. So there was lots of work right after the Second World War. And in the 50s and 60s, 70s, it became a very lucrative time to be around, to be investing, because people started making money in the stock markets. And so you could almost take a dot, throw it on a stock exchange board, pick a stock, and it would be going up. So my generation was very fortunate because we did very well. Many of us did much better than our parents did. My parents were born in the United States, first generation Americans, but all my friends, their families had come over from mostly Eastern Europe. Mostly Ashkenazi Jews. There were some Sephardic Jews in there who came from the Mediterranean areas of Europe. But fortunately, my grandparents were the ones who came over from Russia and Romania and Lithuania, and which is the reason why I guess I'm here. Otherwise, it would have been wiped out, as so many were in 39 and 40s.
So it was your grandparents that were the first generation?
Yeah, my grandparents, my mother and father were both born here, but they were born in the early 1900s, and so they lived through a depression period. Particularly, my father's life was tough because his father didn't really have a substantial job, and the folks, they've worked in the garment center. What they were doing is working on the sewing machines and making the clothes and putting the buttons and zippers on clothes and that sort of thing. And of course, that absorbed a lot of people. And many of the couples met working in these garment factories. They married and then had families. But my father's life was tough because he had to go out as a kid and sell newspapers or shoelaces. And we're talking about when a penny really meant something. And for my father, a penny meant a roll. You could buy a roll for a penny, and that was a big deal for him. And even later on in life, he had this real passion for bread. I mean, he would just, that was a big thing in his life, to have bread, and to have all that bread in our family was like a sign of wealth for him. I think the first time he took my mother out down in one of the East Side restaurants, and they came out with a pan of bread, as they give you now. So we used to go into restaurants and give you put some.
They're just giving it away, a fortune.
Yeah, he was like, amazed. I think he must have felt like, my goodness, I'm in heaven here, you know. So he worked very hard. He was able to put things together, savings, and open up or go into a business with another drugstore in the East Side. It wasn't quite Harlem then. Well, it was Harlem. It was the section was Harlem, but it was filled with a mix of people. There were Italian. There was an Italian section, and there was a lot of Jewish section, and a German section. There were different sections of an area that was kind of still called Harlem. So my father and many of his, well, not many, but some of his friends went into pharmacy also. It was an opportunity for a young man to go into, well, you know, a profession or a place where they can get a job, make some money. It was relatively easy to go through pharmacy school then. I think it was 3 nights a week. And so these fellas could have work during the day, save the money, and pay the $50 tuition, whatever it was. So it was a struggle.
Mm-hmm.
My mother had an easier life because her parents went into the delicatessen business. They started making sandwiches for the people who were the guys who were building this elevated train system in New York, and called it the subways. It came to subways. They eventually put them all underground, but when my grandparents were there, they were building them above ground, 6th Avenue, 8th Avenue. There was a lot of that going on, and they needed a lot of workers, and mostly Irish and Italian, and they would be coming into the delicatessen that my grandparents somehow were able to put money together to open. Not sure exactly how that happened, except they might have gotten these loans from the family. That was kind of a tradition back then. The families were helping the other families. So my mother grew up somewhat privileged in a way because she didn't have that depression kind of atmosphere, environment. She was like almost spoiled. And my father did soon open up his own drugstore. He got married to my mother. What happened was her parents had a delicatessen next to my father's drugstore, as it turned out, and so, you know, that match was made.
Mm-hmm.
And my father worked very hard all his life. Never made a lot of money, but made enough money for us to live very comfortably. We had our own house in the Bronx, which was, you know, somewhat of a big deal. It was an attached house. It was a string of houses. They had the FHA, then one of Roosevelt's programs, were able to lend money to people with a little down payment for them to buy their homes. That Roosevelt era was very important for the growth of that period of time, that really bad time. And then we didn't really come out of the Depression. It was the Second World War that really changed things for us.
What inspired you to kind of pick up where your dad left off, where with the pharmaceutical business? Is that something that was expected of you, or is that something you decided you wanted to do?
I never really wanted to do it. It was kind of expected of me to do it. It was one of those things. Well, okay, what are you going to be when you grow up, Charles? You know, and I didn't have a clue what I wanted to be. You know, when you're young, you're thinking, well, could I be a doctor or a Picasso? It was just like I had.
You had the luxury of maybe at that generation dreaming a little bit, whereas your father said, "Hey, what are you doing? We have this opportunity here. We got it all figured out, and here are the keys. Don't be stupid."
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was just about the thing. Like, hey, your father made a good living. You know, everybody still had the Depression idea in mind. So I guess the feeling, you know, there were always very shaky grounds when it came to finances and stability. But, you know, the pharmacist always had a job, and it was too, even to this day. It's carried on that, pharmacists fortunately get work. Now they're well paid too.
Any stories that come to mind about your experience working the pharmacy in Harlem that just stood out to you over the years?
Well, I was telling one of the things that started when I was young was when the fellas would come in and they would ask me to pick out a card for their sweetheart, and it would be I would give them the dollar cards. We used to have cards that retailed for $1,
And those were the expensive ones.
They were expensive. They had little perfume pockets on them, and they smelled good. They came in a box, and they were very flowery. And I would read them. I was hoping they would perform.
Maybe.
Because that was a big deal. On a dollar card, we'd make a half a buck. We'd make the 50 cents. I guess I was surprised as a kid when somebody would say, okay, get me a sweetheart card. I'd read him a sweetheart card. Then he would say, oh, get me a wife card too. And I guess I must have looked a little taken aback. So this guy says to me, that's all right, isn't it? He must have seen, I was like, how does that work? But that was a little bit of the education that I got working in the Harlem environment, much different than what the white world was, in a sense. I felt now I gradually got into the black world, which I gravitated to. We also had a black nanny at home. So I think all of that together, she was a woman who was... all of us loves her. She was a very dear person, came from the South, very poor. And what the women would do, like my mother and other women who were wealthy and could afford to have a working person, a maid, a cook. Willie did. Her name was Willie. She did everything.
So you grew up eating soul food? What? You grew up eating soul food? Southern cooking?
Cook.
Yeah. We'd make some biscuits and fried chicken and all the collard greens and stuff like that.
I wish we had, but what happened was they learned how to cook our food.
Oh.
So she was a better Jewish cook
than these
was, And they're just very adaptable, When you're young and you're poor, you just learn what to do to survive. And really, I loved Willie, and she was very loving to me. And I remember one of the things about her, particularly aside from the loving part of her, was the fact that she could recite the alphabet backwards, and she could do it fast too. See, down south, they had so little resources when they went to school that they just captured everything they could. So if they learned the alphabet, these kids started learning the alphabet backwards because it was a way for
what you had to work with.
Learning, right. And they didn't have the luxury of having other books, that would go into other parts of history or the world. They were so limited in their opportunities in the South. And I guess I'm still biased in a way that I still think that the South doesn't give the opportunities that the northern schools or northern education did. And I guess I still have some of that feeling.
Yeah. Well, also New York City at that time is the center of the world. It's like in a lot of ways, and it still is. But it's I think now we live in more global type culture with the internet, and everything is available outside of these city centers, like not like it was, when you were younger.
But certainly different.
Yeah. And so when you then opened up your own pharmacy, how did you think when you first got started, and what?
Well, I was working with my father. I graduated from pharmacy school. I went to Columbia in 1949 when I finished high school. We had just gone through the Second World War, which is my generation was the defining moment in our lives. I mean, if you ask me what was the big historical thing that went on, it was the Second World War. I mean, that's, that period of time just was just ingrained in us. And still, I'm still watching on the History Channel World War II. It's almost as if I don't get enough of it, because it was a very, very special time, really. Very,
even to me, it just captured the imagination of the iconic imagery that has come from that, and the stories and the movies and everything. It's still something that even people of my generation are just captivated by.
It was a special time, and sometimes I think when we live in our lives today, and people talk about going to war almost so readily and so easily, it flows up the tongue. Oh yeah, we'll go to war with this country. And it's like, hey, I'm thinking, do you really know what's going to happen? I mean, do you know that your loved ones are going to die, that your brothers and fathers and husbands are going to be killed? Do you know that your cities are going to be destroyed? I sometimes think that people don't realize that when they sort of almost flippantly talk about, well, we'll just have to go to war or we'll bomb them. So anyway, that's...
Yeah, sir. I mean, from my generation, I could say that it never has touched home in the same way that the people of your generation, people, like I said, they just never came home, or they came back injured, or whatever. But the horrors of the First World War and the Second World War is almost like a new thing. I read or listened to this podcast by Dan Carlin, and he recounts. He does a series on the First World War and then the Second World War, but he recites the letters that were sent back and forth, and it really painted a picture in my mind of what the war was really like. And it wasn't this produced documentary that you might see on the History Channel that just kind of is a broad look at it, but it was more of the personal stories of the people in the war, and the innovations and how bad it got with the tear gas and the weapons that came from that, and the tactics. But now, with when I grew up with the Desert Storm and things like that, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and it doesn't hit you in the same way that I would imagine living during the Second World War and the First World War. So, it's...
Did you grow up in the time when the kids were told to go under desks or practice for nuclear or explosions?
Not really. Just on the tail end of that. I mean, because of in elementary school, we did a little bit of that because the Cold War was still going on in the 80s, but it wasn't, it wasn't
that. You didn't have a Cuban Missile Crisis to worry about.
Right. Yeah, we kind of came off the heel on the tail end of the Cold War when I grew up. But then you come high school, and as you get older, you're watching all the wars you see around the world on TV, and it's just out of reach, it seems like. But I think, like you said, now you see the imagery of Ukraine or Israel. It's a kind of reminder that, whoa, this is terrible, and
people die.
Yeah, people dying and destructive, and there's no good coming out of it.
I think a big thing that was different when I grew up, we didn't have the same kind of problems of education. For example, New York City education was free. You could go to college free in New York and get a good education. You can become a doctor or a lawyer without spending any money, without, having to deprive your family and have to worry about a $250,000 debt that you have to. That to me is kind of unheard of. It's part of the new world that is out there. And there's many parts of this world that I'm living now. Some of it is great, some of it is very good, some of it is remarkable, but some of it isn't good. Some of it isn't as good as it had been in terms of education. One of the things, of course, that did change was now we have a much more integrated educational system, because even when I was growing up, even though the education was available, the Black students were not able to take advantage of it for all kinds of reasons. Maybe they had to go out and work. Maybe they weren't thinking college. It wasn't ingrained in them. Where in my environment and the families that I knew, all the kids were going to go to college. I mean, that was a given. It wasn't like, well, maybe you'll go to college. No, they were going to go to college. And then the women of my generation became school teachers. So when I grew up, my teachers were Irish. They were part of the immigration that came before the Jews. And so the women then had an opportunity to go to school and become the teachers. So they were my teachers, mostly an Irish Catholic community. And now I think that many of the youngsters had grown up with Jewish teachers in New York, because that generation then morphed into teaching. And now, fortunately, there are many more Black teachers that, were even thought of back then. It wasn't even an option. So there are things that are different. I had interesting experiences in my father's drugstore, because we were in this Black neighborhood, and we were in a neighborhood called Sugar Hill, and it was that name because it was the so-called wealthier people would be living in there. That's where the sugar, the rich were. And we had Dinah Washington, and we had a lot of performers, artists who were customers, who were fun. And it was always a kick when somebody, one of those jazz singers like Billy Eckstein or all those guys would often come into the store, because we were right there in 145th Street in St. Nicholas is where my father's store was. And then when I left pharmacy school, I started working in his store. And the first thing I did was we modernized the whole store. We used to have a soda fountain in there. We eliminated the soda fountain, and then we just changed the entire store around. We got air conditioning. That was one of the things that I did. The store was a different store. It was a much easier store to work in, and it was also making money. And then as it happened at that time, I was having problems with my first marriage, my first wife, and I had 2 sons, and I was working. I was young and had 2 children. I was 28 and had 2 sons. My marriage was rocky, and my brother came into the pharmacy business. My brother wasn't a very good student, but you could be in the pharmacy store without being a registered pharmacist. So we came in, and then I felt, it's getting a bit crowded here. I ought to go out on my own. I want to go out on my own. And that's when I left the drugstore, told Dad I was leaving, and didn't know what I was going to do. Went to work with a big chain called Duane & Reed. Went there for a couple of weeks, and I learned the discount pharmacy business, which was really quite startling to me. Something I learned. I was good at retail, and I am good at retail. I didn't know what I was going to do when I left my father's store, whether I was going to start teaching. I thought I might like to teach, because I had to go back to school. But I was married, and so I thought I ought to go back into retail, because that's where I was strongest.
And that's when you opened the 125th Street Drug Mart in 1962?
Right. And on 125th Street, people say to me, well, why'd you open on 125th Street? Or why'd you open in Harlem? I knew the black customers. I was very comfortable with them. I really was more comfortable with black customers than I was in the white world, in a sense. And then I knew that 125th Street was a very busy street. And also, it was almost 24 hours a day. There were people there. It was almost like a Times Square. And so I thought, well, I'll just know that I can do business there. I'm pretty sure that I can.
Did your clientele there know you from your dad's store?
Some of them did. I wasn't competing with my father because I was 20 blocks away. We were in different worlds, but the people, would go to 125th Street frequently. And black people in the Harlem area would end up on 120th Street. The banks were there and some different reasons for them to go down to the Amsterdam News headquarters was there. And so they would see me, they would know me from uptown. I didn't really take any of my father's customers away. I didn't want to do that. I had my own customer base, and I went into the discount pharmacy business, which was newsworthy. I got the Amsterdam News wrote some articles about the store because it was so different, and then that was great publicity. And so I started to do very well in the retail pharmacy. In the store, people would tell me, the salesman would say that we were doing the most business of any drugstore above 96th Street, Manhattan, which was a big deal. But then in the 70s, things started to go bad. Things turned.
And then in 78, you just kind of shift gears and you bought or opened up the Whole Foods in Soho, you called it. And tell me about the transition from retail pharmacy to a health food market.
It wasn't difficult for me because the health food industry and the health food store, first they had vitamins were a big section in that. And so I was somewhat familiar with that aspect of the business, the vitamin part, somewhat. But I did learn it really in the health food industry because they were much further ahead than the pharmacies. And I realized that retail was retail. And it's almost like it could have been a jewelry store and I would have probably been successful because I'm just a good retailer. Or it could have been maybe a shoe store. Retail is kind of retail for me.
Mm-hmm.
Although I found the health food industry very exciting. I mean, as you could imagine, in the 70s, it was just beginning. It was burgeoning. It was starting to explode. People didn't know about it. Most of the people didn't know about health food. They knew maybe about Wheat Germ or Del Davis. They heard those names. There were a few, strong people who were into nutrition and fitness ahead of the general population. So I decided to either go back into pharmacy or maybe go look into the health food industry because I had started a vitamin company, and while I was in pharmacy, I wanted a vehicle to get out of retail pharmacy.
So you were like compounding your own brand of vitamins?
We were ginseng was a big deal at that time, and so ginseng was exploding. I got into the ginseng importing business. We were making our own ginseng capsules, distributing it under another label. Imperial Herbs was a company that I started, and we were doing well in that. It started to take off. It wasn't a big deal, a lot of work, but I hired a manager, a salesman, who opened up all the health food stores in New York, because I wasn't familiar with the health food store. To me, a health food store wasn't a place that I was comfortable in. There were kids with braids in there smoking joints. So it was just a different...
Still is in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I was still... Now I'm comfortable in it. But back then it was like, gee, I don't know anything about this. The bottom line, I got to know about the health food industry and realize it's really an opportunity.
And it's bigger than it ever has been. Was there a shift in people wanting to take care of their personal health? Is that what kind of led to the emergence of these health food stores? Because now it's real. People are really interested in taking care of their personal health. Was it that way back then?
That it was the beginning. It just started taking off. Then we, in the New York area, we had a couple of health food gurus who would get on the radio stations, the public radio station, and they had, these devoted listeners who, instead of going to a doctor, might decide to take reflexology or might take acupuncture. See, that was another thing that was happening then. The idea of health was just changing. It was looking away from the traditional ways. They were going into meditation, and I was fascinated with acupuncture personally, because I remember when Nixon opened up China, one of the reporters on the New York Times had an appendectomy and an appendix operation, and no anesthetic, no anesthesia, and it was like, wow, that was all because of acupuncture. And they wrote about it, and that was fascinating. So it was different things started happening.
The Asian culture started to come to the States. Yeah.
Right.
With the popularity of Bruce Lee, and everybody was kung fu fighting and stuff like that.
Well, a lot of the health food products, particularly with vegetarians, came from the Asian world. And so I was selling tofu, and no one, hardly anyone in New York would have heard of tofu.
Right.
And tempeh, and these are very exotic things.
Yeah.
I had
hummus. I don't know when hummus got big, but I remember as a kid, because my dad would go to the granary, which is like a Whole Foods market back when I was a kid, and he'd come home with hummus and baba ganoush. I'm like, what is this?
Exactly. All those very healthful foods. Then people started worrying about gluten. They were realizing that maybe there was another way to deal with this condition, and the traditional medicine wasn't getting them very far. That's when probiotics started emerging, and even to this day, I'm telling my friends, anytime you take an antibiotic, make sure you take a probiotic with it. But the problem is, they go to a drugstore, and the probiotics available there aren't of the same caliber that you can get in the health food store, because the health food store, it has to be refrigerated, and so you have to spend a lot of money to get a good probiotic, but it will work. So it's just a difference. And now you go to a doctor, and he will say, take a probiotic with it. He's thinking
mainstream medicine's kind of caught up a little bit with, they kind of start to adopt some of those ideas of herbs and
oh boy, there was an explosion of herbs, and ginseng kind of kicked it off. But the big major drug companies realized that if they want to explore new products, they should go back to the herbs and go to the forests and go to the jungles and find out what the natives are taking for birth control or for headaches, and they develop new products. I mean, that's where like the birth control pill came out in 62. What a revolution that was! Revelation and a revolution. So there were changes, and that's where they now go to other sources for drugs. They're looking at coral reefs, they're looking at algae, they're looking at all kinds of things. Our world has expanded in terms of opportunities and treatments. What I'm dismayed about is the cost of medicine. I mean, I'm just, when I was in pharmacy, the most expensive product we had was an antibiotic that was $1 a pill. That was like, wow, $1. And I'm talking about 1970s now.
Wow, that's...
And now, people are getting these treatments, like $1,000 a month, and they can't afford it.
Yeah.
Insurance won't cover it. It's very dismaying.
Yeah.
It's just, And then what's even more upsetting, or as upsetting, is watching the ads on television for these different products, to cure everything. I don't know how much you watch television. Unfortunately, as I've grown older, I've watched more, but you put your television set on and you turn on your program, you're going to see all these companies, these drug companies are pushing these ads and, ask your doctor about what's right for you. And of course, the side effect to tell you they'll die, the ultimate side effect.
Did the medicines of your day or in your career, they didn't have that litany of side effects and nightmares and all this stuff?
The first, it's interesting about the side effects because in college I had to write a paper like my graduation thesis, and it was on the indiscriminate use of antibiotics. It just started. We just started to realize when you take penicillin and you take terramycin, those were the antibiotics of the day, aureomycin, certain things resulted, like black teeth or different things would develop. And it was just at the beginning of an awareness that, these things aren't just magic bullets. There's a downside also. So, things have evolved. I mean, we're talking about 50 years ago. It's to me, it's like yesterday, but I realized, my God, we're talking 50 years ago.
Yeah, a lot. Everything has changed a lot, even in my lifetime. Now back at when you were had your Whole Foods market, you had a lot of interesting people come in, Keith Haring, Robert De Niro, Basquiat, and things like that. Do you have any stories from those kind of encounters with these celebrities?
We had a lot of dancers come in. I didn't realize what a area of New York City SOHO was when I went into the drugstore. I mean, the health food business down there. I had no idea what SOHO was like. And SOHO had become SOHO then. It was just like nobody knew about it. It was like, where is it? Well, it was very odd. Nobody went down there. Very few people would go to SOHO. But SOHO had a lot of artists. It was an art community. The artists kind of went into the vacant business and vacant factories down there. There were a lot of factories in that area. It was a factory area in New York City. Big buildings.
Like Warhol and stuff like that. Is that SOHO? Andy Warhol, I imagine him with the factories.
Yeah, but I'm talking about factories like, bread places, building R&H Bakery, that the whole building was making bread. And then there were places, it was a big paper area where they were making the envelopes and the stationery, those kinds of products. But a lot of artists moved in and they took up residence. They fixed up these old dilapidated lofts, and they were there illegally mostly, but nobody bothered them. The landlords certainly didn't bother them because whatever money they got, and many of the young people were dancers. So it attracted dancers, artists.
And when you say dancers, like from the Broadway shows and things of that nature, or more street dance,
the private dance companies. There were like the Alvin Ailey Company, for example, that they were up in Harlem, but it would be a dance company of that ilk, Globalus. There were many of them have remained as major dance companies. We had this artist Basquiat came in the store every day.
Side note, we did a Basquiat-inspired shoe paint custom.
Oh.
So it's just some kind of Basquiat-style doodles and stuff like that. And so we admire his work, too.
Well, he came in every day for a shot of wheatgrass. We used to sell wheatgrass there. We actually grind it, and they partied all night. Many of these guys partied all night, and so I don't know the drugs that they took, and so they They thought they were cleansing their body.
Yeah.
Get a wheatgrass cleanse, thinking, oh, this makes up for all the heroin and all the cocaine. It's like
balance it out a little bit.
Yeah, and everything else, every other drug you could imagine.
Yeah, that's an incredible time.
Wonderful customers. They're just interesting people.
Mm-hmm.
They appreciated the fact that we had very low prices. We became a real destination health food store. And so it was as if all my retail experience came together in the health food environment. My ideas about health, because I was never thrilled about traditional medicine, even in working in pharmacy particularly, got me kind of I had a bad taste about drugs. One of the reasons being that every other day there'd be a drug recall, So the drug that women were taking when they were pregnant to deal with the pregnancy and the discomfort of pregnancy, they found that drug was causing birth defects. I mean, it became ludicrous, and there was...
You were getting the feedback from your customers.
And also, I wasn't only my customers, it was right out there, like thalidomide. I don't know if that name rings a bell. It was a drug that they were using in England and Europe, and they suddenly found they were getting disfigured births, and it almost passed. It was almost distributed in the United States, but fortunately it wasn't.
Wow.
There was just the days that we had also different regulatory bodies that had more teeth in it. What's happened over the years is the regulations that used to be around, whether it was the drug industry, the advertising, the airline industry, the big companies have managed to whittle it away until now they're practically meaningless. What kinds of stuff is happening. And
so the Whole Foods business kind of satisfied you a little bit more because you were...
Oh, it was very satisfying. It was really rewarding. It was economically rewarding because the markups in the health food industry were just skyrocketing compared to the traditional markup. Traditional markup might be 25 or 30%. The health food industries, it was 50%. So it was a very profitable place to be. And one of my successes was the fact that we had low prices. We were able to have an assortment of products. It's like we became a supermarket. We had salad.
Kind of the discount pharmaceutical aspect, but brought to the Whole Foods market.
Yeah, it was like the discount experience I had brought me into the health food industry, and I carried some of those ideas about you can really do well without making this huge profit by just doing volume, and it really paid off. We had people visiting from other countries and other states trying to capture the retail environment, the retailing thing we're doing.
And you had so much success in that your son ended up opening a store himself.
No, he didn't open a store. My son Arnie came into the business. We were so busy, and it was a time when you couldn't get any help. We're talking about the 80s. There was a shortage of people in my industry. I asked my son to come and join us in a health food store in Soho. Because he had some cooking experience, and we had a chef. Our store was like a miniature
one-stop shop.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I did. As a matter of fact, to keep that idea one-stop shopping, I even took in items that weren't traditionally in the health food store. One of the reasons was that the Soho neighborhood didn't have a supermarket. So people still needed bathroom tissue. They needed Kleenex. That's one traditional items that a health food store carried. But we started supplying that kind of item to customers, and it really worked. At that time, salesmen would come into the store and say, "Charles, open up a store on the Upper West Side. There's nobody doing it there. The neighborhood really, really needs it." You'd be filling a need, a demand, and actually I found that's really the secret of retail. If you could just find something that people really want or need. I finally opened up a store, found a store on the Upper West Side, a vacant store, opened up a store very similar, almost a mirror image of the downtown store, even the same footage, 2,500 square feet. And we became the store of the year in the health food industry. People could not believe the volume that we were doing, though.
And it was the first organic and kosher health food.
That's right. One of the things that we were different about, we were special about, was our health food store only had organic in it. It was all organic. So when I opened up the Uptown store, because it was so much of a Jewish crowd, an observant Jewish community up there, that decided to make it kosher too, which was really a really good thing to do. And we had kosher and organic, which was unheard of.
Yeah.
And it was successful. I don't know if you know the Upper West Side of Manhattan, but it is highly saturated. I mean, there's about 250,000 people in an area of 10 square blocks. It's got probably more people than a state has. I don't know, almost as much as a state. So that worked out well. I did sell it after 5 years to a company similar to Whole Foods, the Whole Foods market, I should say, when I say Whole Foods, because that's what the big company's name, Whole Foods market. That's the one that Amazon bought for $1 billion.
You wish you would have held out a little bit longer.
Wait a minute, where did we go wrong? What? We did well. I was very fortunate that we were able to make the money that we did. Also, very fortunately, I bought a building across the street from the health food store on Prince Street, which had become the hottest street in Soho. And at that time, it was almost as high-end as Madison Avenue. It was really slowly getting into that, to where the holding companies would come in, and then actually Bloomingdale's opened up a branch on Broadway. I was able to buy a building just by a fluke, or some fella died of AIDS who owned the building in the early 80s. Not many, but some of our customers died from AIDS, because it was also a gay area. The artists, whether they were dancers or artists or musicians, it was also an area where the gay people felt they can build their community. So this fella had AIDS. He died. His estate sold this building, and frankly, that's where I started making money in real estate.
So you didn't open up a business in that storefront. You just rented that one out. And in that property, you were just renting it out?
I was renting it out, and at first I thought I was going to move. At first I thought I was going to build a health food restaurant there. And the store was so successful. The building was across the street. Seemed natural. Why not? But then the rents became so high, and so I thought, why go through the headache of a restaurant? Just rent it out, which was good. I had redone the building. I had built a new building on the site, and so I had 3 retail operations in that space, and it became a very hot area. somebody offered a lot of money for the building. I sold it, and I've subsequently ended up able to support places like PBS. One of the things I was able to do with the money is do something that I thought was worthwhile. And at least my customers who wonder what did Charles ever do with his money, they can see that I've been giving a lot of money to PBS and other worthwhile charities that I'm involved with. So that's kind of like a Reader's Digest version of what I've been doing for the last.
It's incredible. I mean, you just tell the classic story of the American dream, really, in a lot of ways. Do you think that's still possible in New York to do what you did, or is that kind of like you just had it at the right time?
It's possible, but it's certainly not at retail. I mean, you can't do well in retail now without somebody like Amazon and pretty much capture the entire retail business. And in many ways, it's sad. You can't do well in the restaurant business either, but you can do well if you're in the tech business and if you're one of these people who's got the brains to come up with something, you know, a Google or Twitter, Facebook, things that I'm barely familiar with myself. And these guys have become millionaires, multimillionaires. So there is that opportunity in this particular world, or whatever maybe the new world is going to be, options to fossil fuel. That's going to be a place that people are going to make fortunes. So it's out there.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that this country does is a terrible mistake is try to limit our immigration, particularly of the kinds of people who really can help the country and who really will create jobs. You know, the brainy people out there in the world who may not have a place to utilize their skills. And this has been traditionally, the United States has been this land of opportunity, but I hope it can stay that way, and I hope it is. And when you go to Europe, and people still want to come to this country. They used to want to come a lot more. Now I'm in a world where people are thinking, well, how can we get out of this place, or where would we go? So things have changed.
Still the best house in a bad neighborhood kind of thing, where we still got a lot going for us, but certainly not coming off the heyday and the peak kind of American experience like you got to witness growing up. So congratulations.
I was fortunate.
And what do you do now? What keeps you busy now? So you're retired from your businesses. And anything you like to do now?
I'm involved in art. I developed that artistic part of me, and making some wood sculpting, and I'm doing mosaics and working with glass.
Wow.
In the Berkshires, where I spend 6 months of the year, and I spend 6 months of the year in Sarasota. So in both places, I have a little studio, and I just busy doing that. And friends and family like what I do. People have asked me if I would sell them some pieces, and I haven't done that, but I'm thinking maybe that would be a nice thing to do.
Have a little show. Why not? At least have a social gathering, at least with your friends, and you can show off your art, and that'd be fun.
Yeah, I live in down here has that opportunity. So they do have shows. They have art shows. I exhibit in their shows. And it's a very exciting place to be, because it's it's an environment where you can continue to learn. Mm-hmm. That's something that interests me, is learning. I'm just one of these people who just wants to learn more. I'm excited by learning, and I enjoy the arts and enjoy reading. I keep busy. It's amazing how when you retire, you can keep busy and wonder, you know, where you have all this time, or where you don't have time. And it's like I'm busy now, even though
you're busy doing all the things you couldn't do when you were working.
Yeah, which is
And so you spend half your time in Florida, and then where else did you say?
the Berkshires. The Berkshires is a place in Western Massachusetts where it developed a very interesting artistic area also. I don't know if you've heard of Tanglewood.
It sounds familiar.
Tanglewood is some place that people have heard of. That's where Lenny Bruce was part of the Boston Pops. Sarasota is similar to the Berkshires because of the cultural opportunities here, the museums and the theater, music. That's all in the Berkshires. And then there's things like kayaking, and I'm right on a lake, so it's a wonderful place to escape to. Originally, it was my place to escape from Manhattan, to escape from retail, retail being so crazily hectic. I mean, so
it's a kind of like a charming small town vibe, like Sarasota is.
It was small town when I first went there, started living there, which is about 40 years ago. It's not so much small town anymore. What happened in Massachusetts, they legalized cannabis. So, and this town, Great Barrington, is rather close to the New York border. And suddenly we have a whole influx of New York license plates around this town. And it's grown. There's just a greater population in this country. There's certainly when I grew up. I mean, I don't remember what the population of New York City was, but it was nothing like this. We talked about my experiences in Harlem, but we didn't talk about some of the things that happened that weren't so pleasant there at the end. I just kind of talked about it, but it got ugly for white people there in the 70s, and Malcolm X for preaching very anti-white rhetoric. That combined with the drugs issue and with things like Martin Luther King being assassinated, those created volatile environments, and there was often rioting in there. So it became a place that I wasn't so happy to be there anymore.
Even as an established member of your respected communities, where people knew you, and to some degree, you still found it is challenging for someone like you who has been there your whole life?
The great majority of the people in the community were very peaceful, loving, decent folks. But there was a little kernel of people who were very unhappy with white people being storekeepers. Then they made it very happy with Jewish white people, and that became something that really troubles me about this.
Do you feel like we're in a better place in that respect now, or is it still pretty tumultuous?
I think there's amazing improvements between black and white communities now. Certainly Obama being president is like, well, that's certainly an example of how things change. But one of the things that I am dismayed about is what's happened between the Jewish and the black communities. Somehow that friction has seemed to be growing, and this Palestinian issue with the Gazans seems to exacerbate it, and it's not in a great place, and then there doesn't seem to be much that we can do about it unless some black prominent people start.
What is the hope for the future for you? What do you think we should move towards or get back to?
As a country, or as
a country or as a culture?
I'm very disappointed personally in the way what this country has become in many ways. And I know and I believe this is still probably the best country in the world to live in, but I'm very disappointed as to how slowly we've evolved, or how in some ways we seem to go backwards. And I just don't know what the answer to that is, really. Sometimes I think there's going to have to be a revolution here to change things. I don't see how things are going to change in this country. I see big business as greedy. There's no concern at all for people other than making money, and we don't seem to do much to control big business. I think that capitalism works, but it has to be controlled, or we have unfettered capitalism here, and I don't think it's good. I think
Yeah, I know with our business, we're quote unquote a mom and pop shop, I guess, but we're a small business, caters to our local community. And even in the 10 years I've been doing it, you see a little bit of a shift where people are, I think, more used to dealing with the big chains, and think of the people, the storekeepers and stuff, as a big entity, and forgetting that they're part of your community. And even small businesses like ours, we're the owner operator like you were, but I feel like sometimes they mistake you for a Starbucks or something like that, where the culture is not as trusting anymore, and where it's become a little thankless in some ways. Whereas before, when we first started out, we felt a real connection to our clientele like you, and there's a lot of just great moments we've had connecting with people as people, and that seems to be diminishing a little bit, and there's a little more apprehensive to trusting us to look out for our customers and stuff. So it's a little disappointing in our business too, but we still do what we can do to provide a good service, and still try to make those connections where people are willing to do so. And that's why we enjoy having people like you on, to learn a little bit more about our customers, and have an opportunity for people like you to share your life experience, give some words of wisdom, and things like that. So thank you for sharing as well today.
It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for what you do. This is a real service to the community, and I hope that somewhere you will be appreciated, and hopefully you'll be able to make a decent living doing it. I mean, you do have to live, you do have to eat, you do have to take care of your own family needs, and you want that to happen too. That's somewhere in your mind, and I hope you can keep doing that in a fruitful way.
Yeah, and I hope even I do want to say we're very grateful for what we do and the opportunity we have, and we hope that other people have opportunities like we had and like you had. And I think that's where I would like to see our country go back to: more community, more knowing your people in your community. People like when you were in Harlem, I'm sure they trusted you to look out for them in some ways, to be of service to your community. And so
that's what I tried to do. I think that's kind of part of who I am, or what I am, and it's what I am. That's kind of as a person too. It's really trying to help people, trying to make a better community, trying to give something to the community. I didn't want to feel that all I was doing was making money and just, putting it in the bank and feeling very confident in doing that. I just didn't want to do that. I wanted to provide things for the community too, and I was fortunate that I was able to do it and make a good living doing it also. That's probably a special opportunity
Well, you succeeded where a lot of people, I'm sure, failed. In a city like New York, like they say, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. So it is an incredible story that you shared with us today. So thank you very much, Mr. Charles Rosenblum, and appreciate you being here.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It's nice talking with you.
Well, thank you, folks. And if you like that, check out more on the channel.